Hi everyone. Now, this is something that I was going to talk about a while back, but there's been a lot going on in the news. Obviously, these big developments in Ukraine, and in the last few weeks, of course, everything that's been happening with the royal family and monarchy, pivotal historic events. I've sort of been focusing on this somewhat in the background because it was going on, but haven't really had a chance to talk about it yet. Now, usually with something like this, what I would do is quote an article, a news article, just for convenience and to provide all the details. But the articles that I find tend to be quite lengthy. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to muse really um, on my broad thoughts of the situation. And I'm referring to the communal violence, for want of a better term, that's happened in Leicester between Hindus and Muslims. We've just passed the 75th anniversary of the partition of the Indian subcontinent in 1947. Um, there may be factors involved with a lot of different things going on here, but the trouble is quite significant. Apparently, there's been dozens of arrests, there's been vandalism, there's been sporadic clashes, and it wasn't just like a one-off thing. This went on. I think it's been brought under control now, but it's apparently spread to Smethwick in the West Midlands. The notable thing about this is that Leicester is a city that hasn't had a historic hasn't had the sort of historic problems, I should say, as someone like Bradford. Bradford would, of course, argue they've come a long way. But Leicester hasn't had the sort of historic racial problems that other cities have had. Um, and so it may come as a surprise to some outsiders. Then again, maybe not. Now, apparently, this particular violence started over a cricket match. The nice genteel sport of cricket, well, not so when India and Pakistan is involved. Um, just for the record, I think it's utterly pathetic that grown men, and it is mostly men, um, cannot control themselves in a sporting event. I think it's utterly pathetic. However, I suspect that a little bit like the Celtic Rangers derby in Scotland, in Glasgow, it's deeper than just strong feelings over your side winning or losing. There's nationalism at play, which is obscene considering this is in the United Kingdom, and to bring over the sort of tensions from the Indian subcontinent is very unfortunate. Um, there's going to be a lot of question marks. I mean, there's going to be a blame game. Like I said, I'm not going to read out any news article on this, so I'm not going to postulate on what precisely caused it. I'm not going to blame one side or the other. But I do think it's fair to say that there are thugs and hooligans on both sides. Um, I think there may be some Islamist factions, and there may also be some Hindutva factions. Um, we focus a lot on Islamist extremism in this country, but there have also been examples of Hindutva extremism that have spilled over from the subcontinent. A few years ago, UK cinemas were threatened with being bombed if they went ahead and screened a controversial Bollywood film that some Hindus found to be insulting. Um, Now, that was just a threat, it never materialized. But apparently, they've been chanting that Hindutva phrase, Shri Rama. That's not verbatim, I'm probably getting that wrong. But this is quite concerning. I mean, it's bad enough that we have to deal with Islamist extremism, but if Hindutva extremism's being added to the mix, that's not a good sign. And while the rest of the country was watching the Queen State Funeral and everything around that, the good people of Leicester had to put up with these idiots rioting and causing problems in their city. I was in Leicester in 2010 with my father. I got a good vibe from it. It's a historic city. It's a beautiful old city. I had one of the best curries I've ever had. There was a place just off the ring road, in an Indian restaurant, and it was one of the best I ever had. I got a good vibe from Leicester, so it's sad to see this happening. Um, but I want to put an open question here. Anyone in Leicester, what do you think happened here? I would be wary of anyone just completely blaming the other side because you rarely have a black and white situation with this. Probably there's aggravators on both sides. And it comes down to, I think, young men, sometimes not so young, they can go into their 40s, who basically have no self control and they need to, as they see it, defend their people or their side. And it just, we talk about toxic masculinity. Well, this is a fine example of it. I mean, you get certain men's rights people who deny that this exists, but I do think there is such a thing. And it's exemplified by this sort of behavior. I mean, let's be honest, it isn't women doing this, it's not. You may get the very, very occasional woman involved, but it's really this is a male domain, this sort of violence at sporting events. There was one young woman who was banned from every football ground in the country for hooligan behaviour. I would say that's more the exception than the rule. It's mostly a male thing. And I think it's this thing about wanting to prove themselves. It's pathetic. Um, but people might say, well, they're just fighting among themselves. But I am extending this to the football hooligan thing because, some right wing types will say, oh, this is an example of the failure of multiculturalism. Well, yes and no. Yes, in the sense that blind multiculturalism, I felt for a long time now, is naive. You cannot just have this situation where people are bringing over the grievances, in this case from the Indian subcontinent, and bringing them out on the streets of Britain. Um, Clearly, that is, we shouldn't be tolerating that. But these people, in most cases, will be British citizens. Um, and it's a valid question to say, well, what about predominantly white football hooligans? It's the same toxic behaviour. I mean, there may not be the religious component involved, with the exception of Celtic and Rangers, where you have the Catholic and Protestant sectarianism carried over from Northern Ireland. With English hooliganism, religion's rarely a factor. It's more just a tribal thing with the old derbies. I was coming back from Newcastle upon Tyne the other night, and there's obviously been a match on. Now, there was no trouble, there was no actual violence, but it's never a pleasant atmosphere to have loud drunks on a crowded carriage because you're more self aware. And honestly speaking, I do have some degree of anxiety over this because of previous experiences. Because someone who's drunk, they lose their inhibitions, and when they're with their mates, this is a very toxic combination. When you have young men and they're in this group dynamic, when they're with their friends, I think they have this mindset that they're above reproach. They can do what they want and to hell with everyone else. And you see this in lots of contexts. You see it in the football context, and frankly, you see it with some young army squaddies, behaving badly abroad. There's nothing unpatriotic about saying that, by the way. It's just a reality. I've just been reading, incidentally, Henry VIII and His Six Wives by David Starkey, and he was recounting how in the Anglo-Spanish alliance of 1512, that alliance was tested when some young Englishmen basically went to Spain and got drunk. They cavorted with local women, they fought with local men, and this was an allied country at the time. So it's nothing new. Young men have always had this sort of mindset of empowerment when they've had a few drinks and they're with their friends. This is not to vilify all young men. I mean, I'm 37. I'm not an older man, but I'm not at an age where I'm going out to pubs and getting into fights either. Um, I'm still a young man, but this is something I fully admit as a young man. There's a problem. There is a problem. There are too many guys out there who have no self control. And it's not that they actually have genuine animosity to the other side. Maybe they do in some cases. But I think it's just trying to prove something to their friends. This sort of culture needs to be absolutely dismantled. So people in positions of influence, footballers themselves, I'm extending this into the football realm, footballers themselves, certainly clubs, they need to be taking a hard line. The thing is, though, clubs can only do so much. By the way, the reason I'm amalgamating these two issues is because I came across a report saying that football trouble is actually at a 10-year high. I don't think we're at the sort of levels we saw in the 70s, 80s, and 90s when it was called the British disease. But we'd be complacent if we think football hooliganism has gone from this country. Those ugly scenes at the men's Euro finals last year were a national embarrassment. You know, when louts invaded the IKEA store in London, the police, I think, were slow to act on that. Interestingly enough, at the women's game earlier this year, there was no arrests. There was no ugly jingoistic displays. So usually I'm wary of making gender-based, sweeping statements, but the reality is this is a male problem. Um, I'm not saying women aren't capable of bad behavior. I mean, certainly if you have a drunk hen party, they could be a nightmare. But when it comes to sports-related trouble, let's be honest, it is primarily a male-based thing. This is not unique to the United Kingdom either. The problem with football hooliganism is severe, probably much worse in Russia. I wouldn't be surprised if Putin gets some football firms to join up his dirty war. Turkey, very serious problem. Egypt, very serious problem. In fact, in those countries, I would argue it's far, far worse than anything we've seen in the UK in recent years, at least. Um, but it's a national embarrassment and it needs to be crushed. Like I say, clubs can only do so much. They can ban these louds, but a lot of the trouble takes place outside of grounds where the club has no jurisdiction. I do think they should work closely with the police. I think the police should be empowered to take a very hard line with this. Obviously, you don't want collective punishment. You don't want a situation where all supporters are collectively blamed. That would be wrong. People who paid for their ticket and they just want to enjoy the match. It would be wrong to collectively punish people. But I think where there are troublemakers, other supporters need to call them out. They need to be exposed. They need to be publicly shamed. I genuinely believe this. They need to lose their jobs. They need to really, really feel the consequences. Because otherwise, if they don't, they'll just continue doing what they're doing. You know, if it's a case of, oh, well, we'll give them a 6 month ban, I think they'll just continue. It's utterly pathetic. Getting back to the situation in Leicester, of course, it's good to see faith leaders have come out and condemned it and said we need to join together. We're one Leicester and all of this. But can those leaders really control angry young men who are doing what they want? Um, I think the right approach is definitely tough sentencing. Because the thing is, they're not just fighting among themselves. You know, they've brought infamy to the city of Leicester, much like the Bradford and Oldham and Burnley riots brought infamy to those places 20 years ago. This trouble has, it's done nothing for the image of the city of Leicester. So I would say, I'm not sure what the demonym is, Leicesterians, I don't know. Um, but I think the good people of Leicester need to push back and say these lights don't represent us, and people need to inform on troublemakers. Now, it's one thing if people are actually physically defending themselves. Let's say, for example, you have a Hindu guy or a Muslim guy and they're just minding their own business and they're randomly attacked and they defend themselves. They literally are defending themselves. Of course, that should be a mitigating factor. But if they're going out looking for trouble, that's a different matter. The police, of course, need to be proactive. They need to be, if properties are being attacked, if there's vandalism going on, they need to absolutely go in their full force, if need be, with help from neighbouring forces, Nottinghamshire, Derbyshire. Um, you need to contain this problem before it spreads. Because I remember the urban riots of 2011 across England. Now, back then, it spread. And I'm not saying the police weren't proactive, but I don't know if this thing's fully over. Apparently, there was more trouble in Smethwick. Smethwick's a good 70 miles from Leicester. So there could be copycat trouble in other places where there is both Muslim and Hindu communities. But, of course, faith leaders are going to condemn the trouble, but they're usually middle-aged men who, let's face it, they're not going to be the ones involved in the violence. So I think it's going to take something more. I don't know. I do think there should be tough penalties with the mitigating factor that there might be evidence of people literally defending themselves. Like I say, if someone is only defending themselves or their property and they are using proportionate force to do so, I think that should be a mitigating factor. But otherwise, it's a disgrace that this is on the streets of Britain. Um, but to those right wingers who say, "Oh, well, this is why," I mean, I've seen people saying deport them all. Well, would you deport all white hooligans? It's, I think it's more. I honestly think it's more a problem of young men who don't have self control and this toxic machismo culture more than a religious nationalistic thing. I'm not saying that isn't a factor, by the way. It definitely is, and that needs to be taken seriously. But honestly, I think it's more a machismo thing than anything else because they need to defend their people, and it's this toxic tribal mindset. Um, so yeah, let me know your thoughts if you live in Leicester. But as a general rule, I think this country's too enabling. And just getting into the broader issue of crime and justice, I think we're too soft generally across the board. I take a very, very dim view of loutish behaviour in general. I think sports can bring out the worst in people. The thing is, football is the most popular sport in this country, and it has to be said, there's many supporters who go to a match, they go home, and they don't cause any trouble. So yeah, we should put it in context, but at the same time, I wouldn't totally dismiss it as a small problem. This is not some fringe issue where you get a few idiots fighting on the sidelines. In some cases, you have hundreds of people involved. You know, those people who were invading Wembley last year, we're not talking about a few people. There were dozens, if not hundreds, involved. So this can't be dismissed. I would say definitely football is a problem. Boxing to some extent. Sometimes when you have a British fighter and he's fighting a guy from another country, you get these ugly displays where the other fighter's national anthem is booed. Now that's pure loutishness, and I would like to think our boxers show responsibility and don't encourage that sort of thing. I think some of our fighters have been exemplary in this regard. Um, I remember David Hay when he was fighting, he done nothing to rein back on the loutish behaviour of his fans. And I was disgusted by the way they treated the Klitschko brothers, booing their national anthem and just basically acting like drunken stereotypes. So I think boxing has a bit of a problem. Probably not quite as much as football, but it is there. And apparently cricket too. Um, which is interesting because football and boxing are kind of rough and tumble sports. Cricket's supposed to be a nice genteel sport. Apparently not. I know in the subcontinent itself there's been lots of trouble regarding cricket, but anyone who makes excuses for this, they're part of the problem. So any grown man who says, "Oh, it's just banter," or it's just young men having a good time or something like that, because mark my words, there will be people out there who will try to downplay this. I say they're part of the problem, and they need to be, um, they need to be remonstrated with that. That attitude is just rubbish. Um, so I hope the situation's contained. I hope this is a one-off, and it's not like a herald of something to come. Probably there will need to be some degree of reconciliation going on, but it will require definitely punishing the guilty. Because if you have a situation whereby, let's say, someone has vandalized a mosque or a temple, and they escape scot free, that will only breed anger because the other side will say, well, why are they not being held to account for that? So people need to be held to account for their own actions with the caveat of cases of self defense. But I think, as a general thing, there's a lot of things I dislike about third wave feminism, but one thing that absolutely cannot be blamed on that is this side of machismo behavior. This is something we men need to acknowledge and say this is a problem. Uh, Young men, primarily, behaving like asses and just doing what they want. I mean, put it this way, when it's on public transport, if you have an elderly person, if you have a vulnerable person, women on their own, anyone on their own for that matter. I'm a guy. I feel intimidated when loud drunks get on public transport. I mean, I feel anxious, and it's disgusting that these people think they can throw their weight around. And maybe they might think, "Oh, we're not causing violence, we're not causing trouble," but they need to see the optics of it, and they need to, it's just this casual attitude of we could do what we want because drinking's banned on public transport. But oh yeah, we'll just bring our beers on and just sing loudly. And some people might say it's just high spirits, but it's a problem because if anyone remonstrates with them, they probably get beaten up. So there is a real problem in this country with loutish behaviour, and I think we need to take a harder line with it. I really do. In a situation like what I mentioned with the Tyne and Wear Metro, there's limited staff, and you can't realistically expect a few staff on the metro to take control of hundreds of people. In that case, the police need to be proactive. They need to be working with public transport in these situations. And I think when you have a situation of football fans getting on public transport, there need to be plainclothes officers or even uniformed officers, even better. At least not one or two of them, a significant force. Of course, once again, this comes down to police numbers, which the Tories are partly to blame for. Um, but anyway, let me know your thoughts. But I'll just conclude with this. Look, it's not beta male to call out this sort of nonsense. It's not. It's not in any way being less of a man by saying this sort of behaviour is toxic masculinity. It's pathetic. It's utterly pathetic. And these guys they need to just grow up because all it does is, well, degrade society. It makes it difficult for, if you have a young family who's going out, or individuals, like I say, women on their own, an elderly person, it intimidates other people. And they might say, we're not attacking other people, but yeah, they're throwing their weight around, they're doing what they want. I say crack down hard on them.